Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast. We're so excited today to be joined by Benjamin Prosky, who is the president of the Richard Hampton Jenrette Foundation. And we're going to be talking with him all about what the Jenrette Foundation does and the work that they do, and the amazing resources that they are stewards of. But before we get there, we love to get to know the people that we're talking to and how they kind of found their path into preservation, into the work that they do. So Ben, talk to us a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of led you into this line of work.
All right. Well, thank you, Nick, for having me. I'm a big fan of PreserveCast and Preservation Maryland, so it's an honor to be part of this. Where did I grow up and how did I get into it? Well, I grew up in New York City's first designated historic neighborhood. So it was kind of in my blood. It was bound to happen unless I reacted badly to it. That was Brooklyn Heights, right next to the Brooklyn Bridge. With a great view of Manhattan skyline, except it is a pretty much small scale, small brownstone lined streets neighborhood, and really a fantastic place to grow up. I also split my time growing up, summers, weekends, in the foothills of the Catskills and the Hudson Valley in Woodstock, New York. And people mostly know Woodstock for a festival that didn't happen there. The reason why it was supposed to happen there was it's actually a historic arts colony, and that's actually really why I love it. It was really came to be an arts colony in the early 1900s when a British industrialist came over with connections to Ruskin and William Morris and set up Birdcliff, which is still an active artist colony and really what set the place on the map for writers, artists, intellectuals. And so I think that those two places just imbued me with a love of history and place and architecture. So there it is.
And so did you go, you grew up sort of, immersed in all of this, and then did you you decided you went to get a degree in what?
So I strangely enough, I looked at colleges for undergrad all around, further away, but I ended up right plumb in between New York City and Woodstock at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I was attracted to Vassar for many reasons, incredible academics, but also there was this majestic Renwick building that is the heart of the campus. I'll also add that I went to school in a Menard Lefevre building for my earlier education in Brooklyn. And so I was blessed to learn in these kind of amazing collegiate Gothic buildings, if you will. Actually, the Renwick one is a little more Romanesque at Vassar. But so I got there, and actually, I didn't know what I was going to study. My dad was an English professor. My mom was an early childhood specialist. I kind of thought I didn't want to be a teacher because I grew up in them. I love them, but and I took a class my sophomore year called Intro to Urban Studies. And they explained the unbelievable system of how New York City gets its water from these reservoirs way upstate and these incredible aqueducts and and I was hooked. I was like, this is amazing. I want to know more about these types of things. I want to know about infrastructure. I want to know about historic infrastructure. I want to know about how systems, feed cities and create growth and create neighborhoods. And so I was really hooked, and from there, went on to take lots of art history, architectural history. My advisor was the architectural historian there. And there were there was one internship I did my sophomore year, which was really pivotal. It was luckily being based in the Hudson Valley. It's blessed with a lot of history and unbelievable historic sites that you can visit, many historic homes. And there was an internship available at a place called Wilderstein. Wilderstein was the home of Daisy Suckley, who was a cousin of Roosevelt, FDR. There's a book and a movie called My Closest Companion about his relationship with Daisy. Anyway, Daisy had lived in this Queen Anne style mansion that was her family's mansion until she was in her 90s, reducing herself to two little heated rooms on the ground floor of this immense wedding cake type place. And when she finally passed, everything was intact. And so they were just looking for help. How do you catalog this? How do you find it? And so my job as a 20-year-old was to, for a semester, meticulously, as they taught me, catalog all the china that was in the butler's pantry way up. I mean, we're talking about like 14-foot ceilings and cabinets all the way up, and pieces of Limoges and Wedgwood that had been stacked there for decades and had as much dust as they were thick. So it might have seemed like a little thing, but, I'd get up there on that ladder and I'd do it, and I'd write a sheet about every cup and saucer and platter and put them back in their place. And it was like an amazing thing about knowing that you're doing a part to help preserve this place, to help capture its history, to help make knowledge available. So, kind of set me on a course.
And so where do you go from there to your first job in the field?
So, these are great questions because they're fun. They lead to all kinds of things. My incredible professor and mentor, Nick Adams, who's emeritus at Vassar, great architectural historian, he said to me my senior year, in his kind of booming voice, he said, you need to resolve your relationship with architecture. Are you going to be an architect? Are you going to be a historian? Are you going to do something in the field? And I kind of, didn't have an answer to that. Luckily, as a great mentor and advisor, he suggested an internship. And the internship was that one in my senior year was at a small architecture magazine in New York City, mostly dealing with contemporary issues in architecture. And I did some editing and I learned how to do all kinds of things. Fast forward, the magazine hosted a conference in a different city every year. Luck would have it, that city was Paris, France. And it was June of the year I graduated. So I graduated in May, and luck would have it even more, I was a French minor. And so the magazine asked me if I would help them, with the conference logistics and use my language skills and come to the conference. And I came to the conference, and that trip and being at the conference exposed me to such a range of architectural ideas, from historic to contemporary. And I met two pivotal people. It ended up leading to my next two jobs. The first person was Jean-Louis Cohen, who was the director of the Institut Français d'Architecture, the French Institute of Architecture, which is really a cultural center focusing on architectural ideas, everything from historical exhibitions to publications to contemporary conferences on new architecture in Paris and around the world. He offered me an internship. And I moved to Paris. I was supposed to be there 6 months, managed to get sponsored for a visa through the Franco-American Chamber of Commerce, and I remained there for 3 years. And at that conference back again, right after I graduated, I also met an incredible woman, Phyllis Lambert. Phyllis Lambert is responsible for New York having the Seagram building, an unbelievable modernist skyscraper, right, that redefined sort of modernist skyscrapers in America, built by Mies van der Rohe. But Phyllis was a Vassar grad, and I had met her, and she got back in touch with me after I was living in Paris for a few years, and one thing led to another, and I moved to Montreal, and I worked with her at her museum, the Canadian Center for Architecture. And that's an incredible museum. If people haven't been to it, it has archives from around the world, and a study center, wonderful exhibitions. And so there's the beginning. I always say, and it will be true to what I say about the Jenrette Foundation, internships are just so key. We've got to make sure there are opportunities. I mean, because I don't know where I'd be sitting if it wasn't for those internships.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I don't think I've talked about my career much on this because we interview others, but yeah, internships are critical to all of this. And obviously that's reflected in the work that you're doing with the Jenrette Foundation. So, sort of, I guess, fast forward, you are running the AIA chapter of New York City, which is no small chapter. It's got to be one of the largest in the country.
It
must be
the largest, and
the largest.
We were very, very proud. It was the first chapter made of the AIA, and it is the largest and remains the largest with about. Yeah,
I know that Baltimore was early, but I guess not quite so early. So, so this opportunity with the Jenrette Foundation comes around. What does that look like? How do you hear about it? And what did you know about it before you dove in?
Good questions. So yes, there I am 7 years into heading AI New York and the Center for Architecture. It was a dual focus and just an incredible place. I mean, I'm so proud of the work that we were able to do there, and it's awe-inspiring in many ways. It's also, burning the candle from two ends. It's a chapter with 5,000 members. They're 27 committees. They meet at 8 a.m. in the morning or 4 or 5 p.m. in the evening, and there are public programs every night. And there's, kids programs all day and exhibitions. And we're also advocating to local, state, and federal governments about any issues on architecture. Okay, right. Amazing. And so I get this call actually from a search firm that says that they are looking for someone to really help imagine the future of an organization or a foundation called Classical American Homes Preservation Trust. I'll just be frank. The name was very limiting to me, and I almost didn't take the call because, sure, I love classical home, but, there's limits. But the mandate that the board had really wanted to look towards how to be impactful in the fields of historic preservation, American decorative arts, and historic landscapes, and that there were funds and assets, and they were just eager to hear vision and how to work on this, and that was enticing. What I knew from it was actually interesting. I also took the call because I was intrigued. I grew up. One of my best friends growing up in Brooklyn Heights, her father was a partner at Donaldson, Lufkin, Jenrette, the financial firm founded by Dick Jenrette. And I knew of it forever, right? I'd even visited her dad's office and knew of Dick Jenrette, and actually knew that Dick Jenrette was a great collector of historic properties and furnishings and so on. And so, but had never been to any of them. Of course, the one across the river from me in Woodstock, Edgewater, was on my radar, but I had never been able to get there. So I was curious, right? So there it was. I took the call and started a round of conversations.
And so let's talk about Richard Jenrette, Dick Jenrette. Who was he? And obviously, you kind of mentioned he was a financier and amassed, great resources, and then put those resources, unlike I guess not dissimilar from an antique collector, his antiques were just giant, historic classical homes. I mean, it's the ultimate antique collection. What did he amass, and what did he bequeath to this foundation? Who was he, and what did he leave behind?
Right. And he was an antique collector as well, right? He filled these homes with meticulously collected furnishings of the period. So let's back up. I mean, for those who are interested, you can find books that Dick wrote still and order them online. There's The Contrarian Manager, which is a little bit about his career at Donaldson, Lufkin, Jenrette and his financial thinking, but also talks about his personal interests in collecting homes. There's also Adventures with Old Houses and more Adventures with Old Houses. Dick was a houseaholic. So how did he become that way? I love his origin story. I absolutely do. So Dick grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. But he grew up at a pivotal time. He grew up in the Depression. Lucky for him, they weren't dirt poor. They weren't wealthy. They were probably middle or lower middle class. And actually, just like, contrary to me being blessed by this kind of wonderful historic surroundings of the neighborhoods I grew up in, Dick writes in his books that his parents moved into this, his dad had sold insurance. They moved into this just new cookie cutter development suburb. And it was so boring and everything was so the same and it lacked history and it lacked place. And this is him reflecting, as a kid, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And somehow he had this visceral reaction to it. He also mentions, and it's funny, it sounds amusing, but I think it can make impression. We probably all have those movies that made an impression. Gone with the Wind came out in Technicolor, right? He writes about this, like this glory of the Old South and Tara. Now, of course, there's problematic issues with this, right? Let's say that this was a different time. And let's just focus on maybe the idea of history and the idea of buildings having value and recreating. And so fast forward, he doesn't go into historic preservation or architecture or even art history. He goes to UNC and he studies journalism, actually. But he also serves in World War II, much more in a kind of intelligence, not in a combat. And he gets the GI Bill, and he goes to Harvard, to business school. Now, a boy with a modest upbringing from a quiet Raleigh suburb is suddenly now thrust into Harvard Business School with people like Lufkin and Donaldson, which leads to something, right? People from families in the Northeast who have money, generational wealth, properties, so on, right? And Dick is savvy and he's determined, but he's also like a consummate Southern gentleman. Those Southern manners stick with him forever. And I think he forms, the story is more involved, the stops and starts, but essentially, let's say he forms a partnership with the two. And after they've worked in different places, they decide to go at it and form their financial firm. And in the 50s, and fast forward, right, ups and downs, but it really kind of hits a stride in the late 60s. And then what happens to people when they suddenly start to have wealth that they didn't imagine they'd have? That sounds dark, but it's actually not. I think when you suddenly have disposable income, maybe you tap back into that childhood memory, that warm and fuzzy thing that you saw and wanted and said, when I grow up, I'd love one of those, right? And so he starts to buy himself columned houses. And these columned houses happen to be from the early 1800s. And the first one was Roper House in Charleston. And it's not enough to buy them. They need work. They need to be restored. The second one was in 1969. Roper was 1968. He bought it. The second one was 1969. Edgewater in the Hudson Valley also needed restoration. So Dick's knowledge comes through this desire to live in these places. He wants the older places, and then he has to learn about how you care for them, how you restore them, and then he has to furnish them. And at first he's working with decorators, and they're buying French things, and they're buying lovely things from all over the place, but they're not, he's not choosing it. And the antique dealers that he starts working with help to shape him and his collection through a series of conversations and looking at things. And they say to him, Dick, you seem to like these houses from the early 1800s. You'll find that the furnishings from that era will really fit the houses well and scale and everything. And it also tells this wonderful story then of that moment in America, a moment where it's post-Revolutionary War. There's starting to be incredible devotion to craft. There's a rivalry with British classicism to say, we now are our own country. We can do as well, right? So furniture makers like Duncan Phyfe are doing really high quality things. Yet it's pre-industrial revolution, pre-Civil War. This is where his collection kind of stops because he is devoted to this kind of handwork and doesn't want to get into the machine age, great mass production. And so, Dick, in retrospect, is portrayed as this kind of absolute purist of classicists, and I think those were his tastes. He didn't dislike other things. People with money and clout, as they form their collection and work with curators and collectors, that also helps to shape it, right? So there was an innate love of this stuff, but there was also a kind of, how do you create a collection that has an identity, that has certain characteristics? And it went on from there.
And he creates quite the collection. And so by the time of his passing, which wasn't that long ago, how many homes does he own, and how many are left to this foundation? What is the charge of this foundation then?
Right. So in his lifetime, I can't even count how many homes he owned because he bought and sold a bunch of them, restoring them along the way. There were townhouses in New York City, downtown, Midtown, Sutton Place. He also gains his place personally in his work as an advocate and a great proponent of preservation. And so even if he's not buying them all, he's helping people who found some jewel that they want to save. And either he's helping them financially save it, or he is helping to fund, a national registry application or a designation. So Dick is emerging as a mentor, as an advocate. And so when he passes in 2018, he and his partner, Bill Thompson, have at that time 6 houses. And they are in a range of locations, one being a townhouse on the Upper East Side in New York City. Then there's Edgewater in the Hudson Valley. There's Roper House in Charleston. There is Airmount in Hillsborough, North Carolina, sort of closest to where he grew up. There's Milford in Sumter County, South Carolina. And then finally, there's Kane Gardens in St. Croix. It's a lot of houses. Dick, and he calls himself a houseaholic, right? And in his writings. Funny anecdotes are like, he was a true UNC devotee, right? He loved the Carolina blue. His bedrooms were all Carolina blue and sort of yellow. And he writes that Well, he had so many bedrooms in all these houses that he decided they should all have the same color scheme because he'd be disoriented waking up in different, very different bedrooms. So, he kind of also takes this with a grain of salt. Um, so Nick, I think you asked like where did it go, right? How did it become what it is?
Yeah.
So he starts to collect all these houses, and by the 90s, he's starting to think of his legacy. And so he founds in the 90s Classical American Homes Preservation Trust. Mouthful. Kind of actually just describes his homes. They're classical American homes, and he's preserving them and putting them in a trust. I mean, this is pretty didactic. And one of the homes he kind of doesn't live in as much, goes there occasionally, reserves the right, has bedroom, reserves the right to go there occasionally, but it's Airmount in North Carolina. And so Classical American Homes has a kind of life where, it helps Dick preserves his homes and so on. So when he passes in 2018, he leaves a founding board of people who he had all chosen, people who'd worked with him, many whom, right, came up through Donaldson, Lufkin, Jenrette, and grew their own love of preservation collection. And what he does is he actually does not prescribe the future of the foundation. He says that, the kind of binding things are that it's devoted to historic preservation, decorative arts, American decorative arts, and historic landscapes. And that he leaves an endowment, he leaves all of the properties, and he leaves all of the furnishings and art to be used to advance education around these issues and to cultivate lifelong interest, a next generation. And furthermore, he adds that all of this is left to the discretion of the board and can be used or disposed of in whatever way they see best to advance education in these areas. He also leaves a letter that's non-binding, but says, I hope people will visit the homes if they stay open, but they are delicate. And if it's overwhelming and too many people come, it's not good for them either. And, I hope that there'll be mentorship and there'll be things. And so this is a kind of haunting and wonderful charge at the same time, right? Unlike what most people think or most models we have, like Isabella Stewart Gardner, right? You can't move a teacup in that museum. You can't change the lights. Or the Barnes Foundation, which we know, right, had a huge kind of upheaval because it was really limiting. Dick didn't do this. Dick knew, because he'd run successful business, that things had to morph over time. They had to have a life. As much as he loved his houses and objects, he loved that the field that he cared about, the fields that he cared about, were can continue. And so he left this board with a tremendous charge and a lot of flexibility. And that's kind of where I was lucky to be brought into the conversation, which was, well, what could it be? They did a very, a lot of these people on the board are serious, heads of financial firms. They like data, they like analysis, they like economics. This is a good thing. A lot of not-for-profit boards, speaking from experience, don't have people with this kind of analytical and hard line experience. And they commissioned a study that looked at how historic homes or house museums are performing in America. And it's not that the people who love them don't love them, but they're a lot and they're hard to maintain. And frankly, unless something majorly historic happened there or a historic figure, and we know George Washington slept in many places, but they're hard to maintain in terms of their just visitation and so on. And Dick didn't want his houses to be venues for weddings and gift shops and, things like that. And so we hunkered down once I got the job, and we really went into a deep planning and said, if cultivating a next generation in these fields is what we care about, if making sure people are interested and understand what it takes to save history, save furniture, save historic landscapes, save buildings, maybe pouring all the resources we have into Dick's own homes as the only focus isn't going to meet the ambitions of what he had, right? And remember, quietly, Dick was an incredible mentor to so many people. He was an advocate. He did public service for preservation. He served on the National Trust Board. He was the chair of the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation, right? Essentially the Supreme Court of Preservation in America, appointed by the president. So Dick's interests went far beyond his own homes and his own objects. They were a source of joy, and they were also a model to others. But the idea of tapping into what Dick was as an innovator, as a mentor, as someone who knew how to build impactful organizations, businesses, was really important. And so we, after an intense strategic plan, we decided a few things. Dick, in his modest, gracious Southern way, had left very little with his name on it. The firm he founded was gone. He didn't endow lots of scholarships or things in his name. And so, in fact, this legacy foundation, which had this name that people couldn't really remember, should just be named for him. And then it can imbue and embody all of the things that he cared about, right? So it became the Richard Hampton Jenrette Foundation, or the Jenrette Foundation for short, just like the Andrew Carnegie or Mellon or all these other great foundations. And it really put three words at the center of its mission: education, innovation, and stewardship. Things that he really cared about, right? Stewardship, of course, has to do with the properties and how we care, not only his, but others. And innovation. Where do you bring innovation in? Because he was innovative in his businesses. He was innovative in the way they had to evolve and approach with the times. So how can preservation and decorative arts and historic landscapes also be innovative in their approach to longevity and how they engage people? And
so has that, I was going to ask, has that resulted in the number of properties? Do you still own the same number of properties? How are they managed differently than, right? I mean, because you're talking about sort of moving in the direction of supporting other endeavors like a true foundation versus just taking care of properties. So what does that look like?
Thank you. And yes, we want to be, and I think we're becoming, a true foundation. So yes, after that study that had been done on the house, historic houses and our own, and the amount of deferred maintenance. I mean, everyone says, "Oh, Dick restored these places." Of course, Dick did, but he started buying them in the 60s, right? Something that was restored in the 60s, 70s, or even updated in the 80s, 90s. It still needs restoration now, right? And so Cane Gardens in St. Croix was just not possible. It's a amazing 1700s, a Danish sugar plantation that dates from the 1700s. But it wasn't going to be a historic site that people visited. And Dick actually knew this and suggested this in his lifetime, that maybe this was, so this isn't all out of Dick's consciousness, right? He was grappling with the board already about these things. So Cane Gardens was sold. And then second, Baker House in New York City was sold. Baker House was, though presented as classical, it was a 1930s kind of classical reinterpretation. And if you looked at the other houses, right, they really were from that era that we're talking about, right, the early 1800s. And it was a huge asset and a lot to maintain in New York City. And what was it going to be, right? So that one was sold. And that brought us down to four and really right-sized us in terms of being able to manage and manage those sites, but also then have enough income from our endowment to think about how we're going to be impactful beyond, right? And so we kind of divided our budget. What is it that we need, probably in three ways? What is it we need to maintain the properties we have left and restore them and care for them? How do we do our own programming, right? And have a staff that makes our initiatives and those places come alive? And then how do we fund externally? How do we become a partner to other organizations that we fund things that may have nothing to do with us or about our properties, but are important to offering either lifelong learning or opportunities for next generation of preservationists? And luckily, we were able to do this. And so, for example, I'll give you a couple of examples of the kinds of things we do. For properties, we don't call our properties historic house museums. They're not going to have gift shops. They're not going to have magnets. There's no event rentals. We understand that many places have to do this. It's just not the stream we want to get into. So they're opened in a limited capacity. They're also not really set up that way. Part of their magic is that there are many objects and personal things left from Dick's and Bill, his life partner's life in them. And so they haven't been cleansed in a kind of museum way, right? And so small groups coming to visit is a little more appropriate on occasion. But they need constant restoration. And one thing we're devoted to in our strategic plan is that every restoration project we do is educational, meaning people in the field are invited in at whatever point appropriate to understand and to see the process. And we hope that this is actually a model for many historic sites. In a way, the process of the restoration, the understanding of it, is maybe more important than the end result, because the end result is this beautiful bonbon that can be consumed almost as a one-liner. You go in, you see it looks beautiful, great. But if you see the process, if the curtain is pulled back, you're going to have an understanding, a much better understanding. One thing that you and I believe in, I know, and having talked, is that another through line in our work is that historic trades and craft is just integral to all this work. And I will challenge anybody who says that they're a lover of preservation and decorative arts but has zero interest in the trades and craft, or the fact that the workforce who does those trades and crafts is dwindling, or most of them are 70 and above. As a country, we've turned our back to these trades, and we need them now to save our buildings. And so personally, I'm not interested in a conversation about beautiful places and objects if it doesn't involve the conversation of the labor of how they came to be. Maybe we need to be more intentional about telling the story of whether there was enslaved labor or, underpaid servants, so on, right? But then also who is capable of bringing them back to life now, right? So our sites are teaching laboratories, not house museums. And sure, you can come on that occasional tour where you're going to get to hear lovely, wonderful stories, actually, and see great objects. But we are very devoted to activities like student days, where any active restoration project is going to have a day that students come and learn from the experts what they're doing. They meet a dendrochronologist for the first time. They meet the people who are analyzing the paint and the masonry. They meet, a historic contractor focusing on historic roofs, or the architect who's working on it. And so, sorry, that was a long-winded one for the first stream. I'll get to the next one has to do with the kind of programs. And programs we do have to do with, I'll give you two examples, but our own fellowships. So again, using these sites as laboratories, we've increased to 8 fellowships a year in decorative arts at 2 sites, and we're hoping to increase to probably 12 fellowships. These are week-long, sort of for people who are merging. So the student days are active, probably people in undergrad and grad. Fellowships are pretty much people at PhD level or maybe just emerging early professionals, focusing on a historical aspect, maybe even one piece of furniture or activities that happened, right? They are advancing their own research when they come to one of our properties, and they're helping us advance our research. So we do, as I said, 2 rounds in decorative arts. That's 8 fellows total. We're looking to add one in historic preservation. That would be another 3 to 4, and grow it from there. Another stream of activities we do is, since we have doubled down on our devotion to historic preservation, decorative arts, historic landscapes, building trades, craft, we've done a series of convenings and think tanks, which are about the state of these industries. We've done 2 this year: the State of American Decorative Arts, which convened curators from collecting institutions from across America to discuss how they're handling collections. Are they their acquisitions or de-acquisitions or de-accessions? What do visitors expect? How are they interpreting the same objects in different ways? That was in January. The report was released last week. It's called The State of Decorative Arts. It's on our website. Anyone can access it. And then last week in DC, we did the State of Historic Preservation Education in America. Again, 12 heads of preservation programs from undergrad to grad across America, coast to coast, in the middle as well, south. What do you learn in these programs? What are you set up to do? What kind of jobs are available? What skills do you have? Are we attracting the right people? Are people enrolling? What are the challenges of these programs in the universities that they exist in right now? That universities are having a lot of challenges as they are. And that one will also have a white paper that will come out hopefully in the early fall, sort of to correspond with the academic year. And we'll move on to historic landscapes and historic building, trade, and craft in 2026 with similar convenings and then reports. But we feel and I'll get to the last stream, right? If we're going to double down on our support of these areas, we needed to reset with pulling together some of the thinkers in the field, right, to help us think through what are the issues, what do they need help with, what do they think their fields need to handle in the coming years. And then in turn, that can help us shape our program. So lastly, the partnerships, the grant making, the things that are externally faced. When I joined as president, places with endowments have obligations tax-wise to spend a certain amount of money on either gifts or program. So out of obligations, the organization was kind of in between mode. It had given out $200,000 in grants in 2022. By this year, we are giving out over $1 million in grants. So pretty amazing growth. This is all while doing all that other stuff, right? That's taking care of the properties, restoration. We're replacing the roof on Edgewater. I mean, that's over $1 million project. Anyway, so, and we're now working with well over 50, we call our grantees partners. They are all not-for-profits. They are schools. They are small historic sites. They are major museums. They are, or they are through foundations related to government agencies to help them get interns or so on. So a very broad range, and they are education-based. We do not do bricks and mortar or capital funding. So We will help with a study that could lead to that. We might even be able to help with, an intern on design work. But once you're regilding your capitals of your columns, that's on you. Maybe if you're engaging students of Trompe l'oeil and craft and trade, we can get involved in that. And so we're really excited to give you an example. We're working with organizations now up and down the Eastern Seaboard. I think really, as we said, from Tulane to Maine, we're in Louisiana, all the way up the coast, and starting to venture a little bit into the mid. We're looking, a lot of our funding is internships. How can we expect people to get into preservation or historic building trades if they don't have opportunities to learn under experts while they are doing this work? So a few examples. Historic New England is embarking on an incredible new transformation of its archives into a public space. We met the person who does furniture conservation there. She's brilliant. There was no fellowship or internship underneath her to learn from her. And so we established the Jenrette Fellow there, who's really, it's a post, someone who's just graduated from a program to work on furniture conservation for historic New England. They have incredible holdings. Drayton Hall, right? Incredible opportunity. They're restoring a ceiling. They're doing. They needed a summer intern to help them with research and a range of things there. Dumbarton Oaks, a historic garden landscape by Beatrix Ferrand in Georgetown. Amazing things at Dumbarton Oaks, right? There's a pre-Columbian collection. There's all kinds of things. But the garden is, of course, unbelievable. There were no interns working in the summer on the garden. And under the wonderful garden historian there, she came up with a program in which students from Harvard's Graduate School of Design and their landscape architecture program are going to be they're there now, splitting their summers working part of the time in the dirt in terms of restoration of the landscape, of the plantings. And then because Dumbarton Oaks has a study center, they're also going to be working on a scholarly project for the other part of the time. So you clean your fingernails out from the dirt in the morning, and then you get into the study center in the afternoon. Municipal Art Society here in New York, an intern on advocacy for historic preservation in New York City. And then there are many more. National Trust, 2 legal interns to work on, right? Legal issues, law students in National Trust. So these are some of the types of grants of things that we're looking at. And we feel absolutely, and Dick Jenrette supported people this way. Again, we can't tell people that they have a future in these fields if they don't have opportunities at places like this. And our funding will go much further to create these educational opportunities than it will on maybe one bricks and mortar restoration project.
Right.
So, yeah, and out of it comes a guild, right? I'll just finish it. Lastly, we also do make efforts to link all these young people through what we're calling the Jenrette Guild. We bring them together for student mixer, student days, student things, because they are the future workforce. And it will be everything from, the legal interns to the advocacy intern to the students from the American College of Building Arts that we funded to work on the foundation of Mount Vernon. They need to know each other because they are going to be coming up into these roles and preaching the gospel, if you will.
Yeah, where I was going to jump in and say is that I think for anybody who sat down for this interview and thought, okay, the Jenrette Foundation, they've got a bunch of classical homes and it's going to be about a house museum organization. They're probably pretty surprised by now to learn about how dynamic this organization not only is, but is continuing to grow into, and all the different fields of study and interest that it has. And really, so much of preservation is not squarely focused on the past, but really the future. Like, what does the future, in this case of preservation, look like? The future of communities, and how do you build that future workforce and a group of people that will be in place to care for these places, because the challenges are only get more difficult every day. So just a fascinating conversation. We'll make sure that there's links in the show notes to the Jenrette Foundation so that people can dig in, find out. And as you said, it's not like you can just drop in on these sites, but there are opportunities if people are in the area, or there are programs coming up for them to learn about, and also to learn about your partners, as you mentioned. Before we go, we love to ask people about their favorite historic places or sites. And so that's normally a pretty difficult question for somebody who works in this field. But if you can't pick one that you've been to recently, what speaks to you right now?
Well, I will. I'll go back to the very beginning. Where I grew up in Brooklyn Heights. I mean, it's an amazing neighborhood, but the Brooklyn Heights Promenade is now a historic piece of infrastructure. And if you don't know what it is, right, it's this walkway that's suspended off the edge of the Heights. The Heights is really on a kind of precipice overlooking Manhattan. And it's above two directions of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway that were stacked on top. They were stacked one another. Now, this innovation in the 1950s to stack them, which the city didn't want to do. Robert Moses didn't want to do. He wanted to obliterate Brooklyn Heights. That's what led it to be the first historic neighborhood. But he just wanted to plow a highway through it and it would be gone. Instead, they pushed back. The preservation-minded people pushed back, and they created this idea of stacking it and hanging it off the side. But then they had to give something back to the people. And so they gave this promenade, this walkway above. And it's iconic. And it's an incredible view, but it's also now imperiled because the BQE needs to be rebuilt. And, it's saving it as is, the way it was anchored to the side of this precipice with rebar and concrete. It's failing. And so it's an ultimate preservation infrastructure project. How do you save this, how do you maintain this vital highway? How do you save this beloved piece of urban design and this view? And so I encourage people to go see it. I encourage people to follow the story. I was honored when I was at the AIA to be appointed by the mayor to be on a commission to help try and come up with ways to solve this problem of how do you fix the highway and maintain it. And we had a lot of directions. They still haven't figured it out. But yeah, it's a great spot. And it's a great story of preservation and its history. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll have to do a whole separate episode on that. We love a good preservation story. Ben, it's been a pleasure having the chance to sit down with you and talk about all this work. And we'll have to have you back as more projects and more programs come out of the Jenrette Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Nick, it was a real pleasure. Thanks for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to being in touch.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.